what we started to cover on Monday, November 11th, for those of you who may have missed it. So we just finished with the Boston Massacre, and the main point of that was a major piece of propaganda in order to fire up the colonists to get them ignited to potentially rebel against the British Empire. So what's happened is that with the Townshend Act, they actually ended up getting rid of the Townshend Act, except they kept the tax on tea. But what ends up happening is you have the British East India Company, or what's called the East India Company, and has a monopoly on tea. That means that any tea that is being shipped to the colonies is going to be shipped and sold by the East India Company. East India Company is a big money maker, and so unfortunately what happens is they have too much tea and they need to offload it because tea, like any perishable, will eventually get moldy and gross. So there are these giant blocks of tea, because it wasn't loose leaf tea or in little tea bags, it was these giant blocks of tea, and they were sitting out in the Boston Harbor. And the idea was that as soon as the tea is unloaded into Boston, they will have to pay a tax on it and purchase this tea, and only this tea, not from anywhere else. And the people were unhappy about this. They do not like being told what to do. They do not like paying the taxes, and they sure don't like just being told that you can only buy tea from this one company. And so this fires them up. And just so you know, there are two Boston Tea Parties. This is going to be the first that we talk about. The next one will be a few months later. So what the colonists do is they decide, and this is not all the colonists living in Boston. This is a smaller group of men who decide to protest. And the way they're going to protest is they're going to dress up as Mohawk Indians. And really what they're going to do is wear some headdresses and maybe some war paint. They're not really disguised. You could totally figure out who these people were. But it's still the idea of the protest. And so what they decide is that on the evening of December 16th, 1773, they will stop whatever they're doing and head to the docks. So if they were eating dinner with the family, time to head to the docks. If they were at a tavern drinking, time to head to the docks. This was supposed to be a protest where literally nobody was hurt. And that's true. Nobody actually was hurt in this protest. But what they do is they decide to unload all the tea. There is other cargo on these ships. They do not touch that. They literally open the crates of tea, or sometimes they don't open them, and they dump all of the tea into the Boston Harbor, thus causing a lot of issues. So moving on, this is what I said they did. They dressed up as Native Americans, threw the tea over. Well, nobody was hurt in this, but it did cause a major financial catastrophe for the British East India Company. And so Great Britain responds with this Boston Tea Party by passing what the colonists call the Intolerable Acts. That means they're so intolerable we can't stand them. Okay. So the Coercive Acts is what the British call them. That means they're forcing them. Coercing somebody means to force somebody. So you have the coercive, also known as the Intolerable Acts. These are the same thing. This is England's response to the Boston Tea Party. First thing they're going to do is reinstate the Quartering Act because they need to send more troops and they need to have the troops provided for us. So now you need to be watched over. You have to also continue to provide these men with housing. This is why in the Bill of Rights in the U.S. Constitution, one of our first amendments is going to be your freedom from quartering troops. You don't have to house troops if you don't want to. Part of the Intolerable Act is going to be the Quebec Act. This actually just gives Canada's Catholics religious freedom, but more importantly allows the French, who remained in now British-controlled Canada, to settle in the land west of the Appalachians. So if you're a British colonist living in Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, you're not supposed to cross the proclamation line of 1763. But they allow the French, who, as long as they remain loyal to the British Empire, who live in Canada, they allow them to live there. So it's a huge slap in the face because this upsets many of the colonists. The other part of the Intolerable Acts is actually that they close the port of Boston. They close this port until the British East India Company is repaid. When they close the port, they also shut down jobs. It's like closing the government. People literally are furloughed. Nobody's working. Ships cannot come in. They cannot leave. If you made your living unloading ships, you can't do that. There's no new goods to unload. If you made your living making rope for ships, you cannot do that because the ships are going nowhere. So no new goods are coming in, no new goods are going out. People are literally twiddling their thumbs. So they're supposed to repay the British East India Company, But now they're running low on money because they can't even work. Also, the British decide that Massachusetts needs to become a royal colony, meaning under strict government control. The British government will control this colony. They can no longer make decisions for themselves. They have lost that privilege. The other slap in the face is that British officials are sent back to England to be put on trial. What that means is if a British official kills an American colonist, they're going to send that British official to England to be tried by his peers. That's 3,000 miles away. And so the assumption is that there will be major favoritism towards this British official and that their justice will not be served because he is being tried by people who do not understand the entire part of the story. And so it's just not fair. So this is where we left off. This is the First Continental Congress. So you have the Intolerable Acts. People are very upset. This is all causing a lot of uproar in the colonies. And so they decide to come up with a Continental Congress. And this is where people like Ben Franklin and John Hancock and people like that will end up meeting, James Madison. And it's going to take place in September, the fall of 1774, after harvest season will end. And what they decide to do, how are we going to deal with the British? The colonists do not want to break away still at this point. Many do, but many don't. They still want to be part of the British Empire. So they decide, all right, the delegates that the colonists sent made up this Congress, and that's just the lawmakers. So they decide in September 1774 they're going to boycott English goods. They're not going to purchase English goods, which will send a strong message. And of course, they do what we always like to do, is they write a letter of declaration of rights to the king, which really just states, these are our basic rights as British citizens. We remain loyal to you. Please consider these rights. After they made these two decisions, they decide, okay, that was good. I'll see you again in May. And unfortunately, they will never make it to that point because war will break out in 1775. And that's where we'll stop.